Wonderful. Thank you. There's so many issues out there that we could be discussing, and we're already 30 minutes in, and I think I've got like 11 to 12 questions left. So one of the things, again, as we're discussing um, racial discrimination and bias in the Athens criminal justice system, and we have discussed what has been done through the DA's office um, to help eradicate that, or what can be done to help eradicate that. Then the question I have for you is, of course, recidivism. And whereas you know that the recidivism numbers are higher for Black and Brown people than they are for non-Black and Brown people. How about that one? So my question to you is, um, how do you address recidivism, and how can the faith how can the faith based organizations help to change that, or are you already working with some organizations to help change the recidivism? Because when a lot of times once someone gets into the system, it's so hard for them to get out of the system. So how do we do that? And let's try to keep, because we're pressed for time as usual, let's try to keep that about a minute and a half. And since you're on screen, Ms. Gonzales, go for it.
Okay, well, you know, one of the things that we've seen as a reason for recidivism is because of so many people being under probation. In fact, Georgia is the #1 state for individuals being under community supervision. The estimate is 1 in 18 individuals in Georgia are under that community supervision. And so even though we had some incredible criminal justice reform under Governor Nathan Deal, what in fact occurred was that as mass incarceration came down, fewer people were serving long sentences incarcerated, but they were getting longer sentences in terms of probation. And so they were having to live under sort of this shadow that any technicality could actually become a revolving door right back into incarceration. So I think that's something that we need to take a look at in order to reduce the recidivism rate. But the other thing is to be able to deal with programs such as the Athens Reentry Coalition. You know, and what they try to do is help individuals once they are released, how to become, again, contributing members in their community, because we have to remember that 95% of individuals who are incarcerated will be released, and they're going to go back to their communities. They're going to go back to what they know, and we need to prepare those communities, and we need to prepare them. So the Athens Reentry Coalition does some of that work. There are clinics that are happening at the law school. I have sponsored a series called Faith and Justice Panels, where we are talking with different faith-based leaders here in Athens and Oconee, looking at how is it that the faith community can become part of the solution and welcome back their community members who may have had this time incarcerated and their families who are left here behind. And how do we make that work for everyone?
Thank you. Gentlemen?
Well, I'll go ahead and hop in if that's okay.
That's great.
So in dealing with recidivism issues, and what I would want to probably focus on is what we're talking about are nonviolent offenders who we see coming back to the system. And one of the things that, yes, we did see when Georgia worked on criminal justice reform, what they were trying to do was look at the number of people that were serving in incarceration for nonviolent offenses, and they wanted to lower that. And so they did a number of things. One was they changed the laws on what sentences were available for many nonviolent offenses. They lowered the amount of years that a person could even be sentenced to. So we've actually seen those numbers drop because many charges had longer sentences before criminal justice reform available to them, and they made them much shorter. The other thing they did was emphasize that nonviolent offenses needed to be community-based sentences and not prison sentences. And so what we saw was more people getting probation sentences than what they've got before criminal justice reform, which means more people are on probation because they're not serving in confinement, which is what the state used to do. So when you're dealing with a recidivism for nonviolent offenses, there's a number of things that we do now that we need to continue to do and and actually I think need to try to maximize what we're doing. Our community has been very forward thinking in dealing with addiction. We were on the forefront of creating DUI drug courts, felony drug courts, and those programs have been very successful under Judge Kent Lawrence ran the DUI drug court. Judge Jones started the felony drug court. Judge Stevens has now done that since Judge Jones moved on to the federal bench. We want to make sure that we are maximizing those programs, and I think that needs to be something that we look very hard at. Keeping the programs effective, because effectiveness in those programs is vital. So the program needs to be set up so that it continues to be effective, but that we're maximizing the people that have access to that program. So we need to remove barriers that keep people from entering those programs when addiction seems to be the catalyst of the recidivist issues that they have. Because if we can deal with the addiction issues, we have a chance to help that person move away from coming back into contact with the criminal justice system. We also see that with mental health. We've created a mental health court called Treatment and Accountability Court. Once again, it's a very effective program. We want to make sure it's effective, but we need to maximize that because we do have a community that we see that will come back if they are not getting the treatment that they need. So we need to balance accountability for treatment.
If I can break in here and the question I have is, and I understand what you're saying about the courts. What I'm saying is that somewhere there has to be a link between the courts and the community. And as you have set up the courts, what do we do? How do you see linking those courts actually back to the community to make sure you don't see those persons again? And I hate to do this to you, but give it to me in about 45 seconds so Mr. Patterson can jump in here.
Yes, ma'am. And I'm sorry, lawyers talk a lot. What I would say is the way we live in a community that is a very giving community. We are blessed with people who care. We are blessed with people who want to be involved. And so there are many things that we can do on an individual level. Mentors for people in these programs is vital. And we have people that volunteer to do that. We have treatment providers in the community who give their time. And so I do think there is a way that we can link up because these programs have needs and our community is very giving. So we can link up with our community leaders, with our churches, with our care providers who want to see our citizens thrive. And so I do think that is a point of emphasis to make sure that we are out in the public being proactive, to tell people about these programs, to enlist their help, because it's going to take all of us working to try to make a difference.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Patterson. And I hate to hold you fast, but let's see what we can do in under 2 minutes. Come on, yes, you can do this.
I look at recidivism in just a couple of different ways. First and foremost is what is the underlying reason that somebody continues to come back into our court system? So if we can address those underlying reasons and causes, then we can materially impact in a positive way our recidivism rate. So Mr. Chafin touched on some of those, so I don't want to repeat all that, but we have accountability courts and diversion programs and other ways of addressing these underlying causes. I think the community can partner in several different ways. One, in terms of drug treatment, mental health treatment. Those are really the two areas that I see over and over again, are people who've been mixed up with drugs and alcohol or mental health. So we can partner with other organizations in our community to address those. With respect to our faith-based community, I believe that reentry is an important area that our faith organizations can link up with the prosecutor's office. One other point on recidivism, though, and I think we need to say this, at least I want to say this, is there are some people who continually break the law over and over again, not because they have underlying personal issues, but because they just break the law over and over again. So what I have said is let's differentiate those individuals because they pose a significant risk to our community and property, and that they need to be held accountable in a significant way if they simply will not stop breaking the law. And it's not because of any other underlying issues that we can address. And so I think we need to differentiate those individuals from people who have underlying issues that can be addressed in our court system. And so I think that goes directly to how we keep our community safe.
Thank you. And with that being said, the other question comes to homelessness. We have so many people who are actually arrested um, because they're homeless. There is, I mean, there's no real, they're on the street. They have no real place to go. So do you address those when they come in to, when they come to you, or do they even get as far as the district attorney's office? Or should they? Mr. Patterson?
So I want to address that. First of all, no one is arrested for being per se homeless. People are arrested because of an alleged criminal offense. And I'd go back to something I touched on earlier, that everybody is presumed innocent. But it's important to understand the jurisdiction of the district attorney. In Clarke County, the district attorney only becomes involved in an adult case when there is at least one felony crime alleged. So if it's solely a misdemeanor, it goes to another group of prosecutors in the courthouse called the Solicitor General's office. And a felony is simply anything that could be punishable by a year or more in the Department of Corrections. If it's punishable by up to 12 months in the jail and $1,000 fine, it's a misdemeanor. But no one is arrested for homelessness. It's based on alleged wrongdoing. And then, of course, the prosecutor is called upon to apply the law in his or her discretion and experience in deciding whether to go forward, how to go forward, and if going forward is what the prosecutor decides, how to try to reach a fair and just and balanced resolution of the matter.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to touch on that?
So I'll just say something, because we had a very interesting conversation with Pastor Nathan Bird and Chaplain Cole Napper about this issue of homelessness. And I think we have to be careful when we say that nobody necessarily gets arrested for being homeless. I think technically, yes, you're going to have a crime that you're charged with, but sometimes those crimes are simply because you have no home to be at. And I think there has to be a distinction made, instead of just saying, well, they're being arrested for a particular crime and there's nothing else that we can do about it. I think we have to sort of look at those issues of why those crimes are being charged to them, simply because they are homeless. You know, Athens has a problem with affordable housing. And some people, you know, we have evictions that are going to be looming overhead because of what people have suffered through COVID-19. And some individuals are one paycheck away from being homeless. And so I think we also have to be careful when we label people. Well, how are we looking at them as being homeless? You know, we have thousands of children right now in the school system who can be categorized as homeless. And so I don't want people to just think of homeless individuals as those who may be on the streets and, you know, in dirty clothes, or that are going with a shopping cart down the road. Homelessness has many different faces. And I think we have to look at that before we just say categorically that it is that they're not being arrested for those things. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to spin back just a minute. Again, we've got about 15 minutes remaining. I just want to spin back. Something that came up at the beginning was the discussion of community trust and policing. And you all know that, you know, I think the ACCPD is a pretty good unit. But I also know that they're, just like I think they're a pretty good unit, there are a lot of people who do not trust the police or the court systems. And they believe that there is you know, they may be in, let's say, cahoots, for lack of a better word. So how do you see the district attorney's office working to actually create better community trust? And you're in a tough situation because you're working, you want to have something, you want to create trust with the community, but you also want to create trust with the police, who you work with quite a bit, I'm sure, as they're bringing in those felony charges. So Deborah, you want to start with that one since you're on screen for me? How can we build community trust?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is the exact role between the police force and the DA's office, and make it very clear that there is an independent relationship, that the DA is not in any way counsel to the police department, that if we are in fact charged with the oversight of law enforcement, and if they do something, we are the ones who are sort of responsible for prosecuting them. And so it's very important that we understand that there is this independent relationship, and there should be an independent relationship between the DA's office and the police force. That being said, it doesn't mean that we do not interact. And so it's not unusual for a police law enforcement officer to contact the DA's office to see if they have enough evidence for a warrant, or if they have a particular question with something like that, you know. So those kind of interactions do happen. Also, the DA is in charge of some training for the police department. And so it's really important that there is a professional and courteous relationship between the DA's office and the police department that we have here. I've had many conversations with Chief Spruill. I've taken the Citizens Police Academy to make sure I understand all aspects of the police department and what it is that they do and the people who are there. And I look forward to developing and nurturing those relationships even more in my role as the DA. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think it's important that the person who is actually the district attorney has the experience to actually interface with the police and also communicate with the community about what what happens in the prosecutor's office. I would say that the relationship with the police and the prosecutor's office is kind of a balanced relationship, that we do independently and critically analyze the decisions that they make every single day, but we do also work with them. We're not their lawyer, but we do advise them and guide them in a significant way on many criminal matters. And we also work with the police in order to assess cases and also bring them to court. So while we don't represent them and we do independently analyze their work, we also we also do work with them in order to fulfill our role as prosecutors. I think the biggest thing is that to communicate with the community about the process and about outcomes. One thing about the prosecutor's office, though, is there are strict ethical rules about what a prosecutor can and cannot say during the pendency of a case. So sometimes I think people view that as a lack of transparency, when in fact, the prosecutor has to adhere strictly to his or her ethics and can't simply be talking in the community about pending cases. But we can communicate about the process, and I think we can communicate about outcomes and why certain decisions were made, and I think that will foster trust in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Chafin?
Thank you. And I think that in looking at this, transparency is vital. I think openness is crucial. Citizens, I think, in general, want to make sure that they can trust their law enforcement. They want to make sure that they can trust the court system. And when there's no trust there, it's difficult for everyone. You know, what we want to make sure that we're doing is being open and creating proactive avenues to interact with our community, to let them know some of the work that we're doing. We are a separate organization from law enforcement. Oftentimes, when an arrest is made, we are working with them after an arrest is made, because we are the ones who prosecute the cases that law enforcement makes. At the same time, if a law enforcement officer breaks the law, well, we are the body that winds up prosecuting those cases. So I think that transparency about the work that we do to the community is important. I think transparency by law enforcement is paramount, because information and lack of information is what often builds mistrust. I also think consistency is important. I think long-term consistency, the community knows that the district attorney's office is working to uphold the law, to treat people fairly, is paramount. Many people come into contact with the district attorney's office because they get jury duty. That's where most people come into contact with the court system. But there are those who come into contact with us because either they've been accused of something, or because they have been the victim of something, or a family member has been. And so I think that consistency and professionalism in those areas is vital. If people will understand and watch the process and believe that a loved one is being treated fairly, they may not like what has happened, but they do believe that they were treated fairly. And I think that comes from a consistent measure of being open with the public, meeting with the public, letting the public know what we do, understanding the ethical bounds that Mr. Patterson has referred to, but also working with victims, working with their families, being consistent in those areas, being upfront with the community about if a law enforcement officer breaks the law, we are calling for transparency. We're calling for an immediate independent investigation. We want a full investigation, and we want that to be brought before the people. I think people want to know that law enforcement would be treated like anyone else under the same circumstances. If a person broke the law, no matter what their job was, they should be held accountable. And I think that's one of the things that we see issues with in many communities is there transparency? Do we really know what's going on? When people feel the lines are blurred because someone is in law enforcement has been accused of, or may have been thought to have been accused of a crime. So that in a nutshell is what I think we need to be doing. We need to make sure that we're doing. And I think we are very fortunate is that we do have a good police force here that has worked very hard to have community relationships. But that doesn't mean that we've solved it, and that doesn't mean the work is done. We need to continue to work on that and find new avenues to improve those relationships.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got about 5 or 6 more minutes, and I see that Pastor Hart is still here. And so I am going to let him get his chance to make whatever question that I may have missed, as well as wind things up. And thank you guys very, very much for your time. Pastor Hart?
Thank you, Alicia. I have no reason to doubt that all of you would not make a very good district attorney. My question is, and I'm just throwing it out there for whoever to jump in, what level of experience or qualification is needed to be an effective district attorney?
And I'm happy to go first on that. I believe that experience is 99% of this job. What we do is we prepare cases that have been charged to go to trial. We have to be ready to do that ourselves. In the most serious cases in our community, the community expects the district attorney to be the person trying that case. Our community has seen that. We see that in other communities. If you pay attention to court things, the Supreme Court, you will see district attorneys are often the ones making arguments in front of the Supreme Court, but they're also trying cases in their community. The other reason that experience is important is because the district attorney is the one who hires assistant district attorneys. That person needs to know who to hire. They need to know how to mentor. They need to know how to evaluate. We just got in from the judges what we see as trial weeks next year. There are 60 trial weeks being prepared. We know that we have trial weeks the very first week that whoever's elected is in. There is a trial week scheduled. There are 3 trial weeks the next week. So it is a constant trial schedule. The district attorney has to have the experience to be able to balance the trials with the other work that the district attorney does. And that experience is key because the people in the community want to know that the district attorney is involved, is knowledgeable, and that they can go to the district attorney about cases that they are involved in. The district attorney talks to victims about cases, talks about the legal issues that they're facing, and that's who people want to hear from. So it is a vital role, and the more experience that you have in that area, the more that I think the better suited you are to evaluate and to mentor other people to make sure that they can also do the job of the assistants, because assistants try many of the cases, but the DA has to know that they're doing it well.
And thank you. Someone else want to jump in?
I guess I would concur with Mr. Chafin. It is a serious legal job. It is, it's everything from malice murder conspiracies all the way to shoplifting, it's armed robberies, it's shootings, it's gangs. And I believe the district attorney ought to actually be able to do anything within the office. And that includes, trying the most important cases in our community. I don't think that you can super adequately run the office of the district attorney if you don't know anything about the criminal process, You don't know what the victim advocates do. You don't know what the investigators do. You don't know how the police interface with the prosecutor's office. So I don't think the district attorney should be abdicating all the legal work to other people and simply be a figurehead. The district attorney has to have the proven trial experience, the appellate experience, to actually manage the day-to-day decisions that go on in all these criminal cases that affect the lives of our citizens. And I just don't believe that that can be abdicated to other people. And
I think he's muted.
Yes, he is.
All right, thank you. Sister Gonzales, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. So I am a very non-traditional candidate, and obviously I am not the career prosecutor that my two opponents are. But when we think about experience, I also want us to think, and what are the results of that experience? And what is the job of a DA at the end of the day? There are 18 assistant district attorneys that do the prosecution of those trials. The DA is the leader of the office. The DA is the person who brings the vision, who brings the resources, who sets the policy. And I have spent the past 2 years talking with DAs from all over the country and all over the state. And the approach that I bring to this office, to lead this office, is different only because it hasn't been held here in Athens, Georgia. But it is a system that has worked throughout this country and throughout this state. This idea of a DA who does what needs to be done as a community leader with policy. You know, the experience is not just about what happens in the courtroom, and I would just tell my opponents, do not assume what it is that I know or do not know. Do not assume what it is that I have been involved with or not involved with. And that there is a great number of individuals who will bring their expertise here in Georgia when I become DA to make sure that that office is running efficiently and effectively. But what you cannot bring, what you cannot hire from the outside is a true commitment and dedication to the community and to making a system that has been doing such harm to Black and Brown communities and addressing those issues and bringing them right. And that is experience that I have. As for the legal work, you know, I went and I took on the governor and the secretary of state and won that case not once, but 4 times. And right now we are having this election only because of the legal work that I did in that case to make it actually happen. And that means that 150,000 voters in Athens and Oconee actually have this election in which I and my opponents are actually running in. So when we look at experience, number one, think about, is it the exact experience that we need for the exact job that we're talking about? And what have been the results of all of this experience for the past 18 to 20 years? Because when we look at those results through an open records request and see that even though African-American young men or young boys, 16 and under, form only 13% of the population, they are also forming 49% of what's happening in the juvenile justice cases. And that means that there is an issue that we need to address. And I am the only one who is here committed saying that I am going to address this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I just have one more question, but I need to preface it. We had a lot of questions that we really did not get into to discuss. But I understand because preachers and lawyers are similar. As one person said, we can be long-winded, all right? And so I'm guilty of that myself. But my last question is really, do you all have a question you would like to ask one another before we close? Is there a question that you all would like to ask one another before we close? Mr. Chafin? Mr. Patterson?
I don't really have any questions, Pastor Hart.
Okay. And Ms. Gonzales?
No questions.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you. Thank you, Alicia, for giving leadership to moderating. Thank you, for your service to the community thus far and what you propose to do in the future. I want you to know that First AME, we stand willing to do whatever we can to make the Athens community better. We do believe in the word of prayer, and I would ask all those who know the word of prayer to pray for the candidates. And I would ask that we would support whoever is elected, because we need a strong district attorney in Athens. And so I thank you again, Mr. Chafin. I thank you again, Mr. Patterson. And I thank you again, Mrs. Gonzales, for taking the time and sharing with us. And to all those who have watched and viewed, it's not just good enough to vote. You need to be an informed voter. And I hope tonight you've been informed a little bit more about the character and the qualities of our candidates. Thank you. God bless you. And may heaven smile upon you. Good day.
Take care.
Thank you for having us, Pastor Hart. I really enjoyed it.
Very much.